Anyway, welcome everybody to our meeting. You can hear me. Are you hearing me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So make sure I'm not on my phone and I have double connection here. Let's start out with our recorder's report from Paul Rubitsky. The Towhee was interesting. It's always a fun bird to see. Terry Mitchell had reported a mute swan at Lynn Lane. We've had a couple of Iceland gulls and a lesser blackback gull out at Keystone, and a neotropic cormorant also. And let's see here, what else? And we had a couple of early yellow crowned night heron and a kingbird. The spring stuff is starting to show up. And quite a few variety of the different kind of juncos people have been seeing reporting also. Anything else? And a distinct lack of woodcocks in Tulsa County. Anybody else have anything else interesting to report?
I went up to Tallgrass Prairie last week to see some of the short-eared owls. There were plenty of them, but there were also 9 whooper swans there too.
What kind of swans? What kind of swans did you have, Jay?
What did I say?
Whooper swans.
No, it's the other one.
Trumpeter.
The trumpeter or tundra?
Trumpeter. My bad. Trumpeter.
Trumpet swans. The film
Yeah.
production company is in that area because the docents got a letter that said that they had run into some of the people who were working on the film. So if you go up there, you could see giant caravans of 18-wheelers and ne'er-do-wells with ponytails and earrings and all that kind of stuff. Film cameras.
Was it Martin Scorsese doing that? Is he the
I don't know.
Yeah, I think so.
or DiCaprio?
DiCaprio's in it. Yep.
Yep. Yeah, and Scorsese is directing it, so yeah, might have a chance for a celebrity sighting. Mary, you want to talk about the public lands legislation?
Okay. The most of the state legislators are out of town this week because it's spring break, but there's a resolution that's asking that they recognize the public lands here in Oklahoma, that they benefit the Oklahomans, for both an economic and just a quality of life. And we're asking that people send an email to their state legislator, asking them to support the resolution. And it's a resolution, which means it's not a law. It's just that saying that they do recognize the importance of public lands here in Oklahoma. And you can either, I've put some stuff out on Facebook about it. You can go out and look at that and click on the link. And there's a form there you can fill out that will automatically be sent to your state legislator. Or else you can go ahead and just go Google Find My State Legislator Oklahoma, and then you can put in your address and find your state legislator that way, and just either call them or send them a quick email asking them to support the resolution. And it's the resolution on the Senate side is SR 8, and on the House side is HR 1002. And I think we're going to send out another email tomorrow, and I'll put some more stuff out on Facebook so y'all can go out and look. But it's just in Oklahoma, wildlife viewing has an economic impact of $750 million. So that's actually more than hunting. It's not more than fishing, but it's more than hunting. So basically us and the OS is now supporting it, and so is Sutton. It's a coalition of about 3 different conservation organizations that have banded together, just trying to get people to recognize the importance of public lands in Oklahoma. So we'll be sending out another email on it tomorrow or Friday, and I'll put some more stuff out on Facebook. Basically, we're hoping to have it read in front of the state legislator next Thursday, the 25th of March. So if you guys would be willing to help support that, because birds and bees, bumblebees, all helps with public lands. And there's not a whole lot of public lands in Oklahoma. So,
Harry, if it passes, how will the general public even know about it, much less get to read it and say, oh yeah, great lands?
yeah, I mean, that if it passes, basically it's just, since it's a resolution, it's just recognition of that the state legislators know that, hey, there's an economic impact to Oklahoma for public lands and also jobs and a quality of life. And basically right now it's just a resolution, and maybe later on, you know, hopefully we can get more lands. The ODWC is trying to get their licensing redone because licensing hasn't been changed since 2005. So they're trying to get that worked in. They, you know, a lot of people know, some of the state legislators in Oklahoma don't want public lands and don't want stuff added to public lands. So it's just an ongoing dance, I guess, here in Oklahoma about public lands and how they should be managed. So.
And it would have been another little piece of ammunition to use when we were objecting to that House Bill 2214.
Yeah.
Which ended up, you know, it did get passed by the House. It's going to the Senate next. So we'll certainly be asking everybody to write and oppose, you know, that, although chances of it being defeated in the Senate are pretty slim, but we still need to let them know, you know, they need to hear the feedback. Anyway, we will send an email next day or two with the details on that resolution and telling you what to do and how to get your voice in on that. Okay, are there any other announcements or things we need to talk about?
Well,
Yes.
I have something.
Okay. Oh, yes, the Gail. Thank you. Yes.
The garden tour.
Yes, please.
The garden tour will be coming up May 15th and 16th, and we're going to have 5 houses. It'll be back to our more normal type of tour. And there will be 5 houses on the tour. I don't know where they are right now, but we'll be needing volunteers to work a shift. We'll be following some of the protocols from last year of not handling the tickets and the money. We'll be handling those in a more socially distant way. But we still need volunteers. So I'll be contacting people and sending out pleas. So I hope we'll get plenty of help.
I'll include Gail's contact info in this next email we send out. Because, you know, we're not, normally we'd be passing the clipboard and asking you to sign up, but we can't pass the clipboard here. Although if you'd like to sign up, you could just put in the chat here. If you know you want to do it, put your name and phone number in the chat, and that way we've got it recorded and we know you're interested. So that's our virtual clipboard is the chat window. So please go ahead and do that if you're interested in helping. And as I always say, you get a free ticket. So you're making, you know, and the tickets are going to be $10 this year. So, and that's what, a 4-hour shift?
Yes, the 4 hours.
So you're making and you're going to go on the tour anyway. So you're going to be making $2.50 an hour.
Pretty good pay.
Yeah, we're not at minimum wage, but hey, you know.
Every little bit helps.
Thank you, Gail.
I got something.
Okay, go ahead, Jeff.
I've been talking to Gilcrease Museum. They want to have a Birds and Brew or something event on, I think it's the Thursday, April 22nd. They've asked us to help out with it. They want to have like bird walks around the gardens and all out at Gilcrease Museum. They are going to attendance at 100 people. Even if we split it down to 10 people per group, which is about all I would want to do, If everybody wants to go on a bird tour, that's 10 groups, and they're trying to do them all simultaneously. I'm going to go out there. I don't think there's any way they can have 10 groups simultaneously on the ground and stay out of everybody else's way. But if anybody is interested in helping lead birding tours, I'm guessing you don't need to know much about birds. If you know your common backyard birds, that's probably more than most of the other people most of the guests will know. So don't be intimidated that you need to have a real high level of skill in bird identification. But anyhow, if people are interested, oh no, Gail's already commandeered the chat room, so I don't want to get garden center stuff mixed up with Gilcrease Museum. But Thursday, April 22nd is scheduled for the evening. They're going to have some local brewers and I think some food trucks in there. And if it's a nice evening, it might be just a lovely thing. And if it's pouring down rain, nice to not have some sort of a backup plan. So let me know if you're interested. I know Zach Poland has expressed interest.
Yeah.
Well,
Feel free to use the chat room to do the volunteer for both.
Just
We can
make sure
specify. Okay. Well, thank you, Jeff. That should be a fun event. Okay. Any other announcements? Okay. Well, if not, then Jay, would you like to introduce Dan?
Sure would be my pleasure. Actually, I don't think Dan needs any introduction to anybody in Oklahoma that's familiar with birds. He has spoken to our group several times in the past. And of course, he's the author of our first breeding bird atlas and also winter bird atlas. And he is a senior biologist at the Sutton Avian Research Center. And he is just one of the giants in Oklahoma as far as conservation and birds. And it's a great pleasure to have him here and hear about what his plans are for the second breeding bird atlas. So Dan, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Jay. And hello, friends. Thanks for having me tonight. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here.
Yeah, and I'll give you the spotlight. There we go.
So as Jay said, I work at the George Mitch Sutton Avian Research Center, established in the early 1980s near Bartlesville. And we have a mission of finding cooperative conservation solutions for birds in the natural world through science and education. And we have done this through a variety of projects since our establishment. Our initial flagship project was restoration of southern bald eagle breeding populations in the southeastern U.S. We did that by collecting bald eagle eggs from nests in Florida and bringing them back to Oklahoma, where they were incubated here at our facility and hatched, and the chicks were reared to the appropriate age for release. And then they were released, a total of 275 eagles in 5 southeastern states, to form the nucleus of a breeding population that we were originally hoping might get to number 10 nesting pairs in Oklahoma. And today we have over 250 nesting pairs of eagles in Oklahoma. So that was a huge success. We've gone on since then to do ecological studies of tallgrass prairie birds, research projects on both greater and lesser prairie chickens in Oklahoma, as well as New Mexico for the lessers. And currently we have several major projects, 2 of which are captive breeding projects for endangered species. We're working with the Atwater's prairie chicken, native to coastal grasslands in Texas. And we're working with the masked bobwhite native to semi-desert grasslands of Sonora, Mexico, and southern Arizona. And then we're also doing surveys for monitoring bald eagle nests each year, as well as the surveys that I'm going to talk about tonight. The center was named after Dr. George Sutton, who was captivated with birds at an early age and went on to become a prominent ornithologist and author and artist. And he has spent extensive time studying birds in the Arctic and in Mexico and here in Oklahoma, and published extensively on all three regions. I never had the opportunity to meet Sutton, but in sort of a 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon sort of way, I feel like I know a little bit about him, because working with birds here in Oklahoma, you certainly meet a lot of people who knew Sutton personally, or took a class with him when he was at OU, or corresponded with him over the years regarding their bird sightings. And I think that legacy of mentorship to birders is something that we're proud to continue here at the organization that is now named for Sutton. And we have a variety of projects where we encourage volunteers to help us with our research and conservation. And I'll be talking about some of those tonight. So we're going to talk about bird watching and citizen science, and one of our current projects, the second Oklahoma Breeding Bird Atlas. Now, if you're concerned or intimidated by that term citizen science, don't be. Even if you're not, or don't think of yourself as a scientist, either by occupation or training, you've probably contributed in a number of ways to citizen science projects over the years. I'll give you some examples here in a minute, but if you've ever been on a Christmas bird count, you've been helping with citizen science. It's a term, citizen science or citizen scientist is a term that's really only come into widespread use here in the last 8 to 10 years or so. It's become more popular as a term, but the concept has certainly been going on for a long time. One definition of a citizen scientist is a member of the general public who engages in scientific work, often in collaboration with or under the direction of professional scientists and scientific institutions. So there are a number of sciences that have benefited over the years from amateur participants. Astronomy is one that comes to mind, but I think it's certainly true that among the occupations that have benefited from amateur participation, ornithology is certainly one of the ones that's benefited the most over the years. There are a few bird-related examples of citizen science projects. I mentioned the Christmas bird counts. These were started by the National Audubon Society in 1900. That first Christmas bird count had 27 participants. And the most recent pre-COVID Christmas bird count had over 80,000 participants. So that's a really strong example and a long-term example of amateur bird watchers helping with long-term research projects. Then we have the Breeding Bird Survey that's been going on since 1966 and is looking at breeding bird abundance and distribution across North America. The Cornell Lab of Ornithology started the backyard bird count. And that's a project where you don't even have to leave your home to participate. And there's eBird, also started by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology in 2002. That's become one of the most prolific and accessible sources of information on birds over the years. And by accessible, I mean not only that anyone can participate, but also that the data are accessible to anyone who's interested in looking at it. So it's really become a tremendous resource for ornithologists and birders both to take advantage of and contribute to. And then there are numerous state or county level breeding bird atlas projects that have been started over the years. And we'll get into what a breeding bird atlas is in just a minute. Essentially, they started in Europe, in the UK, and have gradually spread around the world. Here in North America, depending on how you define a bird atlas. We have some early examples in the 1970s, but most of the modern example projects started in the 1980s and 1990s. So here in Oklahoma, the Sutton Center coordinated Oklahoma's first breeding bird atlas starting in 1997. And when that project was completed, we started Oklahoma's first winter bird atlas in 2003. And these bird atlas projects are designed to be repeated at intervals of 2 decades or so. And so now we have just started Oklahoma's second breeding bird atlas. So we'll go into a little more detail about each of those 3 projects. What is a bird atlas? Well, essentially, it's an intensive, repeatable survey of a defined geographic area to document the distribution of bird species. Now, here in North America, most bird atlases have been done on a state level. Some of the smaller countries in Europe and other places have done a whole country at one time. Here in North America, it's generally been a state-by-state project. There are some exceptions. California is doing it county by county. But most often it's done on a statewide level. So Oklahoma's first breeding bird atlas project took place from 1997 to 2001. That 5-year time frame is fairly typical for bird atlas projects. Some states have tried to do them a little faster, trying to finish up in 3 years, for example. Even more states have had to extend that time frame a little bit beyond 5 years in order to get everything done. But most states typically shoot for a 5-year time interval to complete a project like this. So why did we want to do one? Well, about 40 other states have completed atlas projects, including our neighboring states. And by linking all of those different atlases together, you can get broader regional information on distribution of birds. By getting people out in the field in a very intensive way over a relatively short time frame, you can gather a very thorough, current, and organized summary of what current bird distributions are. And they enable long-term monitoring for many different species because it's a project that can be repeated again and again over time. So here in Oklahoma, the first thing we had to do was decide where to survey. Now, some smaller states with more people have attempted to essentially survey the entire state for an atlas project. Here in Oklahoma, we have a relatively large land area and a relatively small population. So we had to pick our battles a little more carefully. So what we did was used a random sampling method. Essentially, we wanted to make sure we had blocks covering the entire state, east to west and north to south. But we also wanted some element of randomness in terms of where each individual block was located. And so ultimately we came up with these 583 blocks of land. Each of these is about 3 by 3.5 miles in size. And they are the blocks that have been surveyed for each atlas project so far in Oklahoma. Collectively, they represent about 1/12 of Oklahoma's land area. In terms of the survey effort that's needed to complete a project like this, we require a minimum of 10 hours of survey time spent in each block. And so if you multiply that out, that comes out to about 146 40-hour work weeks worth of time just to get those surveys done, not including travel time. So I put this in here not to get bogged down in some statistics, but really to emphasize how big of an undertaking these projects are in any state, including Oklahoma. There is no single organization or agency that has enough staff and enough resources to be able to do a project like this on its own. And so volunteers really become an essential component in getting a project of this scale completed within a reasonable time period of say 5 years. So for the first Breeding Bird Atlas project here in Oklahoma, we volunteers from 7 different states participate. And we've already had volunteers sign up from 2 or 3 neighboring states for our current project. So we're off to a good start here. We did a good job of completing the surveys for the first Atlas project. Here's a map showing over 97% of the blocks that we intended to survey actually did get surveyed. Here's a map showing the number of species that were found in each block. And if you look at the red squares in particular, those are the blocks with the highest number of species found in them. They tend to occur mostly in central and eastern Oklahoma, where it's a little more mesic, and as a result tends to have a few more bird species than the more arid western half of the state. Everybody likes top 10 lists, regardless of the subject, I think. And so here's the top 10 list of the species found in the most Atlas blocks during the first Breeding Bird Atlas. Mourning dove came in at number 1. And you can see the rest of the list. I don't think there are any huge surprises there. You could certainly think of some other contenders that you, if I had asked you to guess, you might have put on that list, but these are the 10 that came out as being found in the largest number of blocks across the state. After the Breeding Bird Atlas was completed, we decided Oklahoma was one of the last states to complete a Breeding Bird Atlas, but we thought we had an opportunity to be one of the first states to do a Winter Bird Atlas. And we already had these blocks all picked out, and we had a volunteer base who we hoped would be willing to go out during the winter and do some surveys as well. So in 2003, we launched Oklahoma's Winter Bird Atlas project. And I typically have a technician each year of these projects to survey blocks full-time for me, concentrating on areas of the state where it's difficult to find enough volunteers. And so here's a photo of one of my technicians from the Winter Bird Atlas. One of these people is a birder and itinerant field biologist from Canada, and the other is a Oklahoma Panhandle rancher. And I probably don't have to identify which is which for you. It's just a great picture from that project. It does take a special kind of person to want to camp out of the back of the truck for an entire winter, traveling around the state looking for birds. And who better to do that than a Canadian, right? I don't think he found our winters to be very severe here, and generally I think he had a great time doing it. So over the course of the Winter Bird Atlas, the observers recorded 245 species during the course of the project, which is actually a higher total than were found during the Breeding Bird Atlas. Oklahoma has a lot of wintering sparrows and ducks and gulls and other species here that actually boost our numbers quite a bit. So here's the top 10 list for the Winter Bird Atlas project. And red-tailed hawk came out number 1 here, occurring in or being observed in 95% of the blocks that were surveyed. And one thing that's interesting about this list is there's only 1 species on it shared with the most widely distributed birds in the Oklahoma Breeding Bird Atlas, and that's American crow. The rest of the list is largely composed of resident species, but there are a couple of migrants here that are only found in Oklahoma during the winter, the dark-eyed junco and the song sparrow. Here's a sample page spread from the Oklahoma Winter Bird Atlas, and you can see the distribution produced by these surveys. Cardinal obviously is widely distributed across the state, but its distribution does become noticeably more sparse the farther west you get into the Panhandle. So here are the covers of the two books that were published as a result of these first two atlas projects in Oklahoma, the first breeding bird atlas and the first winter bird atlas. So that takes us to the second Oklahoma breeding bird atlas. These atlas projects are designed to be repeated, say every 20 to 25 years is a typical interval that most states have been trying to repeat these projects on. And by using a continuity of survey design and methods, you can help track bird populations over long periods of time. You can examine range expansions and range contractions. This picture of a collared dove is a good example. During the first Oklahoma breeding bird atlas, there were relatively few reports of collared doves in the results, but that will likely be quite a bit different this time around. That'd be also true for several other species of doves expanding north from Texas that we expect to see changes from the previous atlas project. So let's talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of breeding bird atlas fieldwork. What do you actually have to do to participate in a project like this? So we'll talk about the survey areas and the season of the work and the objectives of the work and some of the requirements and some of the data that's actually collected. In terms of survey areas, once again, this is the same map you saw before of the 583 blocks of land that we're going to try to cover over the next 4 years. We have 1 year done already. The objectives are to document as many species as possible in each atlas block and record the number of each species detected in each atlas block. So those first 2 points are really no different than what you might do on a Christmas bird count, other than the season of the year. You're going out and you're looking for birds and you're counting them. It's pretty simple. And this third point, recording the highest category of breeding status for each species. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. It's one thing that differentiates atlas projects from other bird survey projects like a Christmas bird count. So in terms of requirements, we just need people to have bird identification skills. You're familiar with the Oklahoma birds that are here in the summer. We need people to spend at least 10 hours surveying each atlas block. At least 2 visits must be made to each atlas block, one before May 15 and one after May 15. Need to be able to maintain good records of your observations and turn in your data promptly at the end of the field season. And we'll talk a little bit more about this particular requirement and why there's a little bit of a seasonality to the atlas project surveys. If you were to ask me what is the atlas project season, every project needs to have a start date and an end date. So I'd probably tell you the dates shown by the green bracket here, February 15 through August 15 would be the official dates for the breeding bird atlas. And that period encompasses the wide range of species nesting here in Oklahoma. In fact, there are species that are nesting in Oklahoma even before February 15. Bald eagle certainly comes to mind. They can start nesting in December or January. And you see the picture of the great horned owl here incubating eggs in a snowbank, essentially. So there are birds that begin nesting very early in the year, and some species that continue even beyond August 15. Some of the doves can nest, have second or third or fourth broods even beyond that date. But you see the picture of the horned lark nest here. This is an example of a nest in a summer drought in the Oklahoma Panhandle. So our season encompasses both the early nesters and the later nesters. But really, if you ask me what's the peak of the atlasing season, I'd say it's more represented by this red bracket here, the April 15 to July 15. And that's really when most of the species in Oklahoma are nesting, and it's the most productive time to be out surveying blocks for breeding birds. We do need to be aware of migrants in a project like this. So here, for example, are a series of maps, eBird maps for Swainson's thrush distribution. First map is early April. The middle map is the middle of May. And the third map is early June. And of course, any of you who have been birding in central or eastern Oklahoma woodland in early May have certainly seen and heard quite a few Swainson's thrushes. And you can see from the eBird map that they're quite common here in mid-May. But we know that this is a species that only migrates through Oklahoma. It doesn't nest here. And so it's really not something that we're interested in tracking for the breeding bird atlas. Well, what about some species that do nest here in Oklahoma? We still have some problems with migration. So here are a row of maps on the top for American robin and on the bottom for mallard. Both are species that nest here in Oklahoma. But as you can see from the abundance maps, they're both quite a bit more common in Oklahoma during winter and early spring than they are during the breeding season. So if you're thinking this through a little bit, you might say, well, okay, I can understand that we're not paying attention to Swainson's thrushes because they're only a migrant here. But what if I see a robin in my block? How do I know if it's going to be heading up to North Dakota in a couple of weeks or whether it's going to stick around and actually nest here in my block? And we have two different tools or concepts to help make those determinations. One is what we call breeding status categories. And this is a hierarchy. The observed status is the lowest ranking status. It essentially means there's no real evidence that that species is nesting in the block. And then that progresses up through the confirmed status where we are, essentially 100% certain that the species is nesting in that block. Another tool or concept that we use is that of safe dates. And safe dates are essentially a range of dates during which certain species can be assumed to be a possible breeder in a block if they're in suitable habitat. So take, for example, the second bird on this list, the western kingbird. If you were out in an atlas block in late April or early May and you saw a western kingbird, you don't really know whether that bird is on a territory and is going to nest there or if it's still migrating. And you can use the safe dates list to help make those determinations. So according to the safe dates list, after May 15, there's a much higher probability that that bird is actually on territory and will be nesting there. So you can use those dates to help elevate your observations from the observed category to the possible breeder category. And we'll go through each of those categories. First is the observed category. There's really no evidence that the species is breeding there. So for example, this chestnut-sided warbler that you see in your block in early May, that bird is passing through to breeding grounds somewhere else. And so we don't really have to pay much attention to that observation for the purposes of the breeding bird atlas. But this could also be true for species such as vultures or bald eagles, for example, that might travel a mile or two while foraging. They could have a nest a mile or two away outside of the block and just happen to be flying over the block when you saw them. So these are observations that are going to go into that observed category, as would observations of species that don't have any safe dates or that you see outside of their safe dates. The next category is that of possible breeder. And we use a series of codes to record the information. So code H that you see here is an individual observed in suitable breeding habitat during its safe dates. So for example, if you saw this Louisiana water thrush along this heavily wooded stream, which is certainly good breeding habitat for this species, and you saw it during the safe dates between May 10 and June 30, then you'd be able to record that water thrush as a possible breeder. The same is true for this meadowlark that you see in a pasture, which again is good breeding habitat for that species. You see that it's singing. And if you're seeing that within the safe dates, you can record that as code S for a singing male in suitable breeding habitat during safe dates. The next higher category is that of probable breeder. And there are a bunch of different codes here that qualify a species for this status. If you observe 3 or more birds of the same species singing in your block during safe dates, you could use code M, multiple males singing. If you see a pair that is a male and female together in good habitat during the breeding season, you could use code P, and that would qualify them as probable breeders in the block. If you visit a block and then come back and find a singing male singing in the same location at least 7 days later, you can use code T for territorial behavior. There are codes for courtship displays or copulation displays, as you see here with the downy woodpeckers copulating on the branch. Wrens are an interesting exception to the general rule. Generally, if you see a species carrying nesting material or building a nest, that would be a confirmation of breeding. But because wrens are known to build dummy nests or nests that aren't actually used from time to time, seeing a wren such as this Carolina wren carrying nesting material only qualifies that as a probable breeder rather than a confirmed breeder. And the same goes for hole excavation by woodpeckers. Woodpeckers will sometimes excavate extra cavities, and therefore just seeing a woodpecker excavating a cavity does not necessarily confirm it as a breeder, but it does make it a probable breeder for the purposes of the Atlas project. And then finally, we come to the highest category, that of confirmed breeder. And this is ultimately what we're trying to get as many species into as possible. And there are numerous ways you can do this: observing nest building by any species other than a wren or a woodpecker. Distraction displays. A classic example is this broken wing display of the killdeer that you see here in the lower right. That would be confirmation that that killdeer is nesting. It's trying to distract you and draw you away from its nest. If you see fledged young, such as this young mockingbird hanging around the adult here, that's confirmation that breeding took place in the block. Occupied nest can be helpful from time to time in a situation where you might see, say, a bald eagle or a red-tailed hawk or a great horned owl sitting on a nest, but the nest is too high and you can't see into it. Just seeing that bird apparently incubating or brooding on the nest would be a good use of the occupied nest code. Adults carrying food, such as this orchard oriole perched on the barbed wire fence, has a big beak full of juicy insect it's about to bring back to a hungry brood. So that's confirmation for that species for the block. And finally, nests with eggs or young are confirmation. You see a nest here of a brown thrasher on the upper left and a first egg that's hatched here in the Carolina wren nest in the center. So you can see it's really a pretty simple process to go birding for an Atlas project. The only thing you're really doing different that you might not be used to is spending a little more time observing the birds and watching their behavior and trying to unlock their secrets, so to speak. Find out if they're actually nesting in the block and looking for behaviors that clue you into that. And I really hope you'll consider participating in this project. Every record you turn in is essentially going to become a permanent part of Oklahoma's ornithological history. And we really need a lot of help to get all these areas covered over the next 4 years. If you'd like to learn a little bit more or look at the blocks that are available to be surveyed, just go to suttoncenter.org/atlas or get in touch with me here at the Sutton Center and I can walk you through the process. And with that, I will open it up for any questions you might have.
I was going to ask you what that previous page was. I was going to take a picture of that contact info. I'm sorry. because I would love to be a part. So just go to that website.
Yep, suttoncenter.org/atlas.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Or you can email me at dan@suttoncenter.org.
Okay.
Dan, how many people do you hope to get to help out? You'll think it'll take?
Well, I think the first Oklahoma Breeding Bird Atlas had a little over 100 volunteers. It'd sure be nice to achieve that again. We were able to complete the project effectively in 5 years with that level of participation. Obviously, last year was a very unusual year. Just as we were launching the project is when the COVID pandemic began spreading. So we did complete a field season, but it was, far short of what I had hoped to accomplish in the first year. So there's certainly some ground to make up.
And as far as visits to one block, I know you want 2 per season for that one block. Can it be more than that if you want
Sure.
to do that?
Yeah. There's no maximum. I mean, you're certainly welcome to make extra visits. What I would say is, if you were planning to make 100 visits to the block, I would much rather that you sign up for additional blocks than make 100 visits to one block. But yeah, I would say most people probably make 3 or 4 or 5 visits to their blocks.
Do you have a lot of empty territories this year or blocks?
Yeah. Obviously the bulk of my volunteers tend to come from the Tulsa and Oklahoma City areas. So the blocks are immediately adjacent to those cities tend to be the ones that go the quickest. So if there are parts of the state that you enjoy visiting, you might consider signing up for blocks in those areas. I would also say that if there's a county, maybe 1 or 2 counties away from where you live that you really haven't done much birding in, that you consider signing up for blocks in those areas as well. It'll help the project and it'll expand your birding horizons a little bit beyond the places that you traditionally go.
And each block will only be surveyed during 1 year, and then that one is done?
That's correct, yeah.
How many volunteers do you have already this year?
I've been doing a sign up push this week, and I have a stack here. I haven't counted them, but it's a good start on the year.
How large is each block, Dan?
Each block is about 3 by 3.5 miles in size.
And most of them are on private land?
Well, yes. Oklahoma is famously about 97% private land. And therefore, a lot of these surveys end up being done from public roads. Many of the blocks, pretty good road network through them, so it's possible to do that. But anyone who isn't necessarily shy about talking to people, I do encourage folks to, talk to local residents and ask them for permission to take a walk through their woods or their pasture. A lot of times they'll say yes. But overall, I would say much of the surveying really gets done from the public roads within each of these blocks.
And it's up to the surveyor to determine where to go and not to go within that block.
Correct, yeah. Yeah, we certainly don't want anybody trespassing without permission. That's really important to the overall success of the project to maintain good relations with landowners across the state. And we want to represent birding well in addition to the Atlas project.
And Dan, we had a question in the chat about how do we go about reporting nest parasites such as brown-headed cowbirds and cuckoos?
Yeah, if you find a nest with a cowbird egg or a cowbird chick, that would certainly be confirmation of breeding for a cowbird. If you see a cowbird fledgling being fed by another species, again, that would be confirmation of breeding for the cowbird as well.
So it's a twofer, huh?
Doing well.
Yeah, it's a twofer, absolutely.
So when do people start going out?
Well, I'm going to be putting packets together over the next couple of weeks and mailing them out. So I assume people will at least have the opportunity to start going out in April if they want to.
Did you say you want to visit each site multiple times or?
At least twice, once before May 15 and once after May 15 would be the minimum.
Okay, and so if you have this area, then it's just kind of up to you how long you stay in each part of the area per visit.
Yeah, there's no real structure. There's no instructions about you have to spend an hour here or an hour there. You can go through the block and essentially find the best areas of habitat, or look for every kind of habitat that you can find in the block. So you'll gather the biggest bird list.
Okay, yeah, thank
And
you.
was it a minimum of 10 hours total time
Yes.
per block?
Per block.
And because it's really June, I would say, is the most productive month for atlasing here in Oklahoma. We require that earlier visit just for some of the early nesting species, things like chickadees and titmice and nuthatches that nest quite early in the spring. So during your early visits, the objective is to concentrate on some of those early species and try to confirm them as breeders. And then when you go back in late May or June, you'll really be able to clean house on almost everything else.
Well, anybody else have any other questions for Dan? Well, if not, Dan, thank you. That was very interesting. Hopefully we'll get a bunch more people signed up here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dan, I'm going to take you up on it.
Great.
Two. Sounds like fun.
Okay, well, normally I'd say go hit the refreshment table on the way out. So I'm going to tell you all, go down to your refrigerator and grab a snack and a drink. See, at least with Zoom meetings, you can have an adult beverage. So.
Great
Hey,
idea.
Dan, thanks for talking to us.
You Dan.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dan. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next month. We'll be announcing hopefully the speaker shortly for April. We don't have that one quite lined up yet, but so just watch the email and the website and Facebook, and as soon as we have that, we'll be announcing it. But we'll be meeting the third Tuesday in April. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, John.